Hello. Kia ora koutou, ko Sean Hennity, toko ingoa. Hei kairanga aho ki te timi na maramatanga. Hello, I'm Sean, and I'm a researcher at TEC, Te Amarangi Maturanga Matua. And I actually thought it was going to be really scary today, but the lights are so bright that I can't see you at all. So I'm just going to talk to the abyss, so hopefully it's okay. But yeah, today I'm here to talk to you about some research we recently carried out at the TEC about transitions from secondary school, supporting learners achieve a fulfilling life. So yeah, I just really want to start by just saying a big thank you to Kate and to everyone who's come along to the Hui. I just want to mahi to the absolute awesome work that is always done in this space to better support learners in our rangatahi. So it's a really exciting opportunity for me to actually speak and share the research with people who are super passionate and live and breathe this kind of stuff every day. So really, thanks for having me and letting me share with you today our findings. Yeah, so just before I start the presentation, I do just want to have a quick promise from you all today. Akonga have given their informed consent to actually share their stories with you today and with the report. So within the report, the names of actually the learners have changed themselves, but their stories have not. So please hold them with care and treat them as the tonga that they are. So the TEC's vision is for a resilient, prosperous Aotearoa, where every person has the skills, knowledge, and confidence to create a fulfilling life. A big crucial part of that journey is leaving school and sort of where students make that first big decision towards their fulfilling life. The decision they make at that point does impact their outcome throughout their life, and having the right support at this time can really make the highest quality decisions. So to understand that school leavers' decision and their experience of what do I do when I leave school, we at the TEC carried out deep dive research into what a fulfilling life is to school leavers, and then their skills, knowledge, and confidence needs to make that school leaving transition decision. The report delivers a real detailed understanding of how school leavers decide what to do when they leave school, what they choose, and then their needs and their barriers that they face. Today, I'm just going to give a real brief overview of some of the main sections of the report, but there's a lot more detail in the report itself. So if you haven't seen it already, please check it out on the TEC website. There is a link to the report there as well. And there's also a link to the webinar that's at the end of the pack. So if you fall asleep halfway through this presentation, you can catch part 2 online. And then, so I'll just give you a run through, and then I'll have if there's some time for the questions at the end, I'm happy to take them, but also I'm going to be at the TEC booth, so I'm happy to have the corridor there as well. So this project is what we're calling a foundational piece of research that really provides the TEC and sector with a real evidence base about a real key customer group for the TEC. By understanding current generation of school leavers, we can begin to think about the future, their future needs, and how we can better support them today and for the future as well. It's a key tool for us at TEC to think about how we can support learner-centric decisions. So insights from this research has really been embedded into the National Career System Strategy and the Tahatu project as well, to really ensure that learners are sort of at the center of the design and the development of these projects. So a bit about how we did it before we jump into the findings. So this is a bit of a unique and integrative approach that we've really taken to collecting and synthesizing the data. So we've actually analyzed data from 4 different data sets. So we analyzed data from the IDI, which is the Integrated Data Infrastructure data. So that actually tracks real school leavers. So the 60,000 school leavers that leave every year, it tracks them by different important characteristics about where they go, what characteristics they might have, demographic, region. It's real data about real people. So that sits above the whole research. So it's really awesome to have that. We also reviewed a ton of literature about what's existing and what's currently known about learners in this space. And then we also sent out a survey, sorry, it sounds so scouse there, sorry, to all the schools in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So some of you may have actually received the survey itself, and over 500 learners actually replied to the survey. And then that's all pulled together and then weighted to reflect the actual demographics as well. And then I had the real privilege of actually traveling around the Motu as well and being able to interview 56 learners, like in depth, about their experiences of really making this transition decision. And then when we did the qual research, we really tried to reach those learners who might not be represented in the other data sets as well. So all that data has been pulled together and then synthesized. So when you hear some of the findings today, that's what it's going to be. So it's all sort of packaged together, and it will reflect that. And then the final thing in the report is just that the research also pulls together specific analysis about what we call the TEC priority groups. So that's Māori, Pacific, disabled, neurodiverse, and women learners as well. So we pull out some of those particular findings that relate to those customer groups as well. So I'm just going to start by giving you a walkthrough of today's 60,000 school leavers and who they are. So this page kind of pulls out just a couple key stats that I think are really important to know. So the graph at the top right, the top right really shows the ethnicities of school leavers. So our first finding here really is that school population is different to the New Zealand population. We see that there's a growing proportion of school leavers that are Māori, Pacific, Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American, and African. So 25% of the school leaver population is Māori, which is significantly higher than actually Aotearoa's general population, which is about 16.5% Māori. So as these learner groups grow and they transition into employment and education, the work to reduce systemic barriers and bias has an ever-growing need. Another one of TEC's real priority groups is disabled and neurodivergent learners. We can see that 15% of learners report a difficulty consistent with a disability and 9% with a neurodivergence. And something else that was actually really important to understand was about that learner context in their lives. So we found that 82% of learners had an additional responsibility outside school. So at a time when they're sort of pretty busy deciding what to do next, they're also considering sort of balancing schoolwork with paid work, caring responsibilities, volunteering work. So there's lots going on in their learners' lives at this point in time in this transition. So now we can look at when do learners leave school. So at the top of the page, we can see that about 76% of school leavers are leaving in year 13. And this has actually increased from about 71% over the last decade. So we're actually seeing that learners are staying in school slightly longer than they had done previously. And then we also looked about what qualifications learners have when they left school with. So we see that 40% of all learners leave with university entrance, so with UE. So we can see that 20% of learners leave with only NCEA level 1 or below, and that trend is moving in a positive direction. So the proportion is slightly lower than it was 10 years ago, and the number of those learners leaving with level 3 has also increased. So as well as staying in school longer, learners are actually sort of achieving higher qualifications as well. Now, if we're looking at where school leavers go after school, so this graph kind of shows the pathways that they take after school. So this pie chart, you can sort of see that big pink slice. So we see that 60% of school leavers transition straight from school into some sort of tertiary study of some kind. Within that, the university pathway is the biggest one, and that's the most common pathway for all school leavers. So that's 30% of all learners go into a university pathway. And this is in comparison to about 6% who actually transition into an apprenticeship pathway. Polytechnics and PTs are about in between, about 10 and 13%. The second most common pathway is the work pathway, so that's that blue segment, if you can see it. And that's 29% of school leavers transition straight into the work pathway. And then finally, there is the NEET pathway, so there's 8% of learners to transition into that, not into education, employment, and training pathway. So later in the presentation, we'll actually talk through some of how those pathways might differ by different groups of learners. But hopefully at this stage, it kind of gives us a bit of a big picture of who today's school leavers are. So the TEC's purpose and vision sets out to think about how can we better support New Zealanders achieve their version of a fulfilling life. So as a starting point for the research, we asked learners what was a fulfilling life to them. So what we see is that most importantly to learners, having enjoyment and happiness was the key for them to get to a fulfilling life. We see that overall there are about 42% of learners valuing both of these. And other things are really important as well. So having a good work-life balance, continuing to learn and progress, having stability was also really important and quite common as well. Having enough money was important as well. And this was enough money to be able to do the things that I needed to do rather than having loads of money to do whatever I wanted. And that pattern was actually held regardless of decile as well. For Pacific learners in particular, we saw a real value in being able to support my family. So supporting my family was important to 50% of the Pacific learners compared to 22% of the full cohort. And when we asked learners to rank them, this was often the number one thing lots of Pacific learners actually ranked. And it often outweighed sort of individual happiness and their own enjoyment as well. So here we can see that learners are making balancing multiple values alongside interests in order to get to their version of a fulfilling life. So as well as asking what their definition of success was, we also asked what factors were really important when they chose a career or career path. So when it comes to a career as opposed to just life in general, we see that that enjoyment factor is even more important. So 81% of school leavers said that they were motivated towards a particular career because it was something that they were enjoyed or it's something that they're really interested in. So discovering passions, interests, what they can enjoy is really a starting point for how many learners make decisions and sort of is a natural in for careers, products and services. And for those learners who do really value enjoyment, then the career system functions really well and connects learners into pathways because of that. But there are learners who have different values and they do feel shut out. For example, there's those learners who don't value enjoyment. So enjoyment isn't the most important thing for all learners. So particularly not for some of those priority groups like we've just talked about. So for Pacific school leavers, they said supporting my family was more important than doing what I enjoy. Or neurodivergent and disabled learners place more importance and value on stability or being in control in their life. And for those learners who don't really value enjoyment highly in their career, or there's no real in for them to engage into career planning and decision making, and this is just disproportionately impacting TEC priority groups because they're more likely to have different types of values. And then there's those learners who wanted to try and meet multiple values. So when choosing what they want in a career, school leavers are also trying to balance a number of other factors and priorities as well. So they're including sort of what the work environment's going to be like, how much does it pay, making some learners make decisions not just for themselves but for others as well in their whānau. Like one learner we spoke to said, "Oh, I'll just do whatever my mum needed me to do." And then there's those who just don't know what they enjoy. So school leavers find this transition decision particularly difficult because because they just don't know what they want and don't know what they enjoy. There's this quote from Marka who said, "Miss keeps telling me what to follow, what I'm interested in, but I don't know what I like." So learners who don't really know what they enjoy, or don't really feel they have a real touch point into engaging into careers at the career system, and they're more likely to be undecided at this sort of key step. And this can make it really difficult for learners to actually get engaged into the career system if immediately at the start they're kind of feeling shut out. So when we think about how we want to connect with learners and we want to engage them into the career system, we want to think about how they can support them meeting their like a range of values that could be inclusive of things like supporting my family or stability, rather than having a solely enjoyment-based approach to careers. So this graph now here shows the top 11 most common careers that school leavers said that they were planning to pursue. So number one career aspiration that school leavers had when they were leaving school was to become an engineer. So 10.4% of learners said that that's the pathway that they wanted to pursue. And that's twice as common as all the other pathways, or the second most common pathway, which was business person. Across this sort of group, we looked at like what's the similarities that they shared, and it's things like tended to be sort of professional trades and sort of community-based occupations as well. The other thing this data shows us is that school leavers' aspirations are still fairly narrow. So half of school leavers are planning to pursue just one of 11 careers. So some of you might be familiar with the Drawing the Future research that the TEC carried out a couple of years ago. That found that half of primary school learners aspire to 1 in 9 of careers. So that you can see that on the website, the TEC website as well. But we're kind of seeing, so if half of primary school learners aspire to 1 in 9, half of secondary school learners aspire to 1 of 11, aspirations are still relatively sort of limited. And sort of the definite work needs to be done in sort of broadening aspirations for all learners. So as well as asking what career school leavers were really planning to pursue, we also asked them like what their dream choice would be. Like what could they do if nothing could get in the way? We've called this their dream career. So that's like the green on the left-hand side of the diagram, and that sort of captures the top dream careers. So I don't know if you might be able to see. It's things like sports person, musician, kind of creative careers, psychologist. These are all absent from the planned careers that are on the right-hand side. In the center of that Venn diagram, in that sort of teal color, we kind of see that these are the most popular and the most popular dreams, but also the most popular planned pathways. And they kind of highlight this sort of the more sort of prestigious or visible occupations, things like doctor, scientist, engineer, business person. So for 67%, so 2 in 3 learners said their dream career was different than the career that they were planning to pursue. And almost 1 in 3 said their dream career was different altogether. So a total pivot away from that initial idea that they had. And this pattern tells us that practical considerations and barriers are really impacting choices. And that's leading learners to explore different pathways and particularly pivot away from creative careers. So just to kind of wrap up that kind of section about aspirations and values and their future, but some opportunities for all of us in the sector is to try and broaden learner aspirations at secondary school as well as sort of a primary, and making sure learners have lots of awareness and exposure to pathways and to role models. And then for those top 10 or top 11 careers, we want to think about what package of support we could put around those pathways, and if learners needed to pivot, like how could they pivot into a field that's sort of similar or within that sort of sector as well. So now that we know that practical factors and barriers are impacting success and can make it really hard for learners to actually follow their pathway, we're going to take a look at what the most common barriers that learners face to this decision. So these are the top 5 barriers. So the first barrier was cost. So this was the most common barrier that learners face to making this decision and to being able to do their pathway. And that affected 48% of learners. So that's about 1 in 2 learners said that cost was a barrier. And this was even more a barrier to the TEC priority groups, so affecting 76% of Pacific learners and 72% of disabled learners. And cost influenced choice in a few ways. So there was that opportunity cost. So in terms of, in terms of money not earned whilst that they were studying, financial pressures to support family and whānau, and then some learners feeling pressure to go straight into the workforce instead of into tertiary study. And the financial cost of study, they also shut down some or all tertiary pathways for them as well. So the fear of sort of that high cost of study, of taking out student loans, particularly if it was like leading to a career, sort of not really a prescribed career at the end of that pathway, or particularly long qualifications. Learners were sort of deterring from it, and it wasn't really, they were initially just like, I'm not going to be able to do that, and just rule it out immediately without exploring other options. There was obviously the living costs of tertiary study being located elsewhere, so lots of learners were choosing to stay at home, and that was just impacting their pathway choice as well. And this was even true when Fees Free was in place and other programs to support financial needs. The next barrier was connections. So 1 in 3 learners said that a lack of connections to actual networks or not really knowing people in their field that they wanted to get into was a real barrier for them. So knowing people in industry and or who are in a pathway that they're interested in really lets learners sort of understand what it's really like and sort of connect to employers and others, and that can really help facilitate the journey. But some learners don't have that opportunity, so it becomes more difficult for them. Thirdly is capacity. So this is like a lack, this is really interesting, I think, the lack of time and space to actually fully engage in career planning. So at the point of leaving school, it's the most academically challenging year of their lives. We know that 82% of the learners have additional responsibilities outside of school. Sort of that practical demand on time to really think about career planning really is impacting their decision. And that's disproportionately actually affecting the TEC priority groups as well. So, for example, 84% of Pacific learners have responsibilities outside caring for family and whānau. 51% of Māori do, compared to 15% of non-Māori and non-Pacific learners. Other side of that coin is that doing these extra responsibilities and experiences are really enabling and are really beneficial to learners to get into work pathways. They often develop transferable skills that they can apply to work as well. The next barrier is COVID. So yeah, that was a bit of a game changer for some. So 23% of school leavers said their leaving decision was affected by COVID. And that was things like learners were saying, it impacted negatively on my mental health and my mental well-being. They weren't able to travel. It affected the industry that they were planning to go into, and it affected the actual grades that they were able to get as well. So for 1 in 3 learners, who are affected by COVID, it triggered a total rethink of whatever their plan was initially. And then again, for their TEC priority groups, the impacts and repercussions of COVID were more likely to impact and have higher impact on those groups. And then finally, there's those systemic biases. So systemic biases leads to learners not really having equal access and opportunity, and that influences pathway and pathway choice. And even though learners are really resilient in the face of this, it has an impact. I want to share a quote with you from Lachlan, who I had the real privilege to meet in South Auckland. And when I read this, I just want to remind you that he's 17. We do live in a Pākehā world, Pākehā education system. It fails to recognize that people of color and Pacific Islanders, and even people who have immigrated here from Asia, how their cultures, how their ancestors lived and learned and shared knowledge. Māori, they have learned visually, and they didn't learn through writing. So now bringing in this whole Pākehā system and education, it's harder for everyone else who isn't Pākehā to fit into that and to be able to reach the high standard that Pākehā people are reaching. And then we see evidence of the systemic biases actually impacting learner pathways. So for Maori and Pacific learners, they're twice as likely to leave school with NCAA level 1 or below. They're less likely to go to a university, and when they do enroll in tertiary, they're more likely to enroll into a foundation level learning than another group. And these patterns are caused by streaming practices, socioeconomic equality, and other things, and there's lots more details in the report if you were interested in that. And then also for women, they're much likely to enter an apprenticeship than men. So even when they're pursuing similar careers, so women are more likely to go into a provider-based course than through a work-based pathway. So for example, if two learners were pursuing the same sort of pathway and the career to become an engineer, women were more likely to enroll in a provider-based course and rather than study as an apprenticeship. And that just has huge implications in terms of future debt, employability, the skills that they're learning as well. So it's really having an impact. So all of us today will have a role to play in addressing the barriers and the systemic biases. Some opportunities for us are to think about how we can support and ensure that all learning environments are, and sort of career guidance is culturally affirming and accessible and designed for the needs of priority groups. We want to make sure that information about cost and financial support is really clear about pathways as well. And then we also want to help facilitate those connections between learners and employers so through sort of work and career expos and gateway programs as well. So the next part of the report is all about the inputs into this transition decision. So it's the learner skills, the learner knowledge, and the learner confidence needs. So firstly, I'm just going to cover the learner knowledge needs. This sort of looks at the informational needs, where learners get information from, the usefulness of that information, and sort of key influence as well. So in terms of informational needs, we see that learners need 4 types of information to make this informed decision. So firstly, there's that orientating information. So that's that knowledge about themselves, about what their strengths are, what their values are, what they like, what they enjoy. Then there was that tailoring information. So taking that sort of orientating information and thinking about how you could get to a particular pathway. So what aligns to those learner values and so what interests and their definitions of success. Then there's that deep information as well. So there's that information that's often really experiential and it's telling that learner what it's really like. And then finally, there's logistical information. So that's that information about how do I make it happen, what's practical, how is it actionable, how can it help me get to that particular point that I'm really keen to go to. And then we also see that learners are getting information from 3 different sources. So there's people, experiences, and static resources. So see that people seem to be the most common channel of information for all school leavers. So parents and other family and whānau have really strong, close personal connections, so often means that they have a real good relationship and personal influence as well. And we see that some learners are actually more likely to seek out information and become aware of career aspirations through these personal connections. So 30% of Māori and 39% of Pacific school leavers said that they knew a family member or a whānau member who aspired, who's in a job that they aspired to, versus 21% of non-Māori and non-Pacific learners. But what we also see is that information isn't that useful. So we actually mapped what information they received against the usefulness of that information that they experienced. So we can definitely see that there is some that the informational needs are not being met. So yeah, people are using it in different ways, but there's definite room for improvement on lots of different sources of information to meet learner needs. What we did here was that value in first-hand experiences of meeting role models, sort of work experiences, gateway programs. They're the most useful sources of information when we asked. Oh. He did fall asleep. We're back. Okay. Yeah, they're the most useful sources of information because they really help learners sort of trial their pathways. It increases their confidence, it provides validation, and it really it reduces that uncertainty as well. So there's a great quote from one of our learners who said, like, you wouldn't test drive a car without buying it, so why wouldn't you do the same for a career? So for when we make these decisions, we need to ensure that all learners are equipped with these 4 types of information, and we want to support learners connect to the world of work through these first-hand experiences that are so valuable. So the next section of the report looks at the skills needed to make this transition decision. And when I'm talking about skills here, I want to be clear that I'm talking about decision-making skills, and that's not specific job skills or employability skills that you need to get into a particular pathway. So what we found was that having the right information and the knowledge is necessary, but it's not sufficient to actually make the transition decision. So learners need to be equipped with actual decision-making skills in order to make a decision that leads to their version of a fulfilling life. So up until the point of leaving school, leaving school, learners typically had made decisions that sort of have a right answer kind of thing. If you think about the way that they've actually made decisions in the past, it's usually quite formulaic. They follow a particular procedure to answer it. If they don't know, they're just going to ask somebody for help or what the answer is itself. But this decision, what do I do when I leave school, it's fundamentally different. And we see that learners are having a hard time sort of making this decision because they just haven't done it before. And this is what we're calling a complex decision. So for this decision, there's no right answer. It's not one that can be known beforehand. There's not just one information, it's lots of different little bits of decisions that are all pulled together. It can only be made of imperfect information as well. And school leavers just aren't used to making this type of decision. And then we see evidence that school leavers haven't actually been equipped to make, with the decision-making skills to handle these complex decisions. So, and this we see this because it kind of points to gaps in the decision-making skills. So for those learners who found this decision really hard, it was like 44% didn't know how to choose an option or compare their pathways. So they didn't know how to compare different types of options. They didn't know how to set a goal for their decision. 38% didn't know what they wanted. And then the stakes are paralyzing. So 23% of them struggled with the weight of the decision. So being ill-equipped with these, the decision-making skills leads to learners making decisions that don't really align to what they want. So we've got some examples up here. In the bottom middle, you can see Meredith, who says, I really, really like hotel management, probably because it's in different places and I want to go almost everywhere, since you get to travel whilst you're working and you get paid. So here Meredith is doing a literal translation of what she enjoys, which is the travel to a pathway within tourism and hotel management, without really understanding that hotel management doesn't necessarily involve a lot of travel. Or there's Alison in the top middle. She says, it takes 7 years to do a business degree, and I need that to own my own business. So Alison had made that sort of pathway decision off this incorrect information. So because she hadn't really been equipped with the skills to assess that information credibility, sort of her dream of sort of opening a bakery and starting her business was kind of over before she had really explored it. So fundamentally, this kind of just points to gaps in decision-making skills, and that just leads to poor outcomes for everyone. So it's poor outcomes for the learner and sort of greater levels of distress if they've chosen something like that doesn't really align to where they want to go, but then also unnecessary costs for the education sector as well. So for better outcomes, we need to think about how we can equip school leavers with better decision-making skills to actually handle these complex decisions. So these are things like How can we set a goal? How to weigh, prioritize, and sort of compare options? Sort of, how can I focus on the things that are really important for me, like today, but also in the future as well? And yeah, how can I make the most of the needs of to better understand, really? And then finally, there's the confidence section. So this section really explores the confidence needs that learners face and the challenges that it plays and, in this actual transition decision. So for 48% of learners, they said that a lack of confidence was a barrier to being able to do what I wanted to when they left school. So that's 1 in 2. And this sat alongside cost as the most common barrier that learners faced. So this lack of confidence barrier, it sort of came in 2 real forms. Firstly, the whole thing feels overwhelming. Learners feeling that they have to get the decision right. It's going to determine the rest of my life. Sort of 17-year-olds saying to me, it's too late. I've chosen my subjects. I'm kind of locked in, and I can't change. Like, the stakes are extremely high, and it feels paralyzing. Secondly, it's that real lack of self-belief and the confidence that they can actually do it and have they don't feel competent enough to do it. I'm now actually going to share a quote from another one of our learners who responded to our online survey. I just want to remind everyone here again that this learner actually took the time to write this out word for word in one of our open text boxes. I'm fearful. I fear the future so much, it's hard to describe it. I fear that I won't be able to make a life for myself. I fear that I won't be able to get the grades I want that can lead me towards that field. I don't know if I have what it takes, the potential to study science or engineering. I'm not naturally smart, not at all. Every grade I get is rooted in that fear, so I try my absolute best, so it ends up hurting even more when I don't get the grade. I want to do well. I want to be able to look at my life and say, I did it. I found a dream, I turned it into a goal and accomplished it. I want to succeed, but I'm scared. And this fear has held me back and continues to do so. I'm scared of finishing high school so damn much. I'm scared of university, of choosing what to study. I'm scared. I'm so scared. So yeah, it's been extremely difficult. What we did hear was that from learners was the importance of champions and to actually build confidence and enable success. So champions are those sort of real awesome key people who probably lots of you are today that really believe in learners and they have someone in their corner and believe that they can actually do it. This could be like parent, teacher, family member, or someone who's just like a couple years ahead of them in their actual chosen career path as well. I know lots of you already are, but I would really encourage to think about how the role of confidence plays in this transition decision and how your work and your initiatives can better support learner confidence needs as well. Be learner champions. So that's kind of like the main findings from the body of the report. And then the next sort of section is about sort of the pathways that learners take from secondary school. So I'll just pull them up. So we're going to sort of look at the specific. What we've done is we've pulled out the specific needs for those school leavers who go to sort of on each of these different pathways. So that's to an apprenticeship, a polytechnic, a PTE, university, sort of going into the workforce, or sort of any other neat pathway. And then those who are still undecided at this point of leaving school. So these are sort of displayed in sort of handy one-page infographics towards the end of the pack and the report. So I'd just encourage you guys all to take a look at the ones that you might be most interested in as well once we've wrapped up. But today, I think what I want to share with you today is just the one pathway from the undecided group and what their needs look like, because this might be a group that we know least about and one that might need our most support. So looking at the top of the page, we kind of see that about 10% of learners are still sort of undecided at this sort of point about when they're leaving school. So that's 10% of all school leavers, so that's about similar to those learners who enroll into a PTE. And we see evidence that these learners are typically finding this decision a lot more difficult. So if you look on the left-hand side, it kind of points to those characteristics of sort of undecided learners. So we see learners like with needs across the spectrum of skills, knowledge, and confidence as well. So, for example, they're much less likely to have confidence in the short, medium, or long term, less likely to have that orientating information about what their passions and interests are, or that tailoring information about what that options means for me, and then that logistical information to actually get to what they wanted to do. And then feelings of sort of anxiety, being confused, feeling pressured, really typify what this pathway feels like to lots of learners. And then also, you can also see on the bottom right that lots of these learners have actually identified of having more barriers than the full cohort. So lacking of money, availability of jobs in my area, sort of family not really supporting my choices, but yet lots of them were actually still expected to leave with UE. So this undecided group, it's one that we can definitely benefit from all our support. So I encourage you to think about how you and your mahi will make a difference to undecided learners. So that kind of concludes, I'll just sort of start to wrap up now, but some of the main findings from the research. I'll just run you through and remind you of some of those sort of top 5 key takeaways that I think would be awesome for you all to leave with. Number 1, so the school leaver population is diversifying. Learners have a wide range of backgrounds and needs, so the need to support all learners to ensure that they get to their sort of version of fulfilling life is really important. Number 2, systemic biases are impacting learner success. Number 3, first-hand experiences are the most useful form of information for learners to fully engage in this decision. Number 4, but even with all that awesome information, learners can only use it effectively when they've actually had all the appropriate decision-making skills. And then number 5, which is that confidence. So confidence is impacting success, so affecting almost half of learners. So that was a super quick run through of all the research. There's a lot more in the report that you can take a look at, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavor of some of the things that are in there, and you can take a look on the TEC website or come and chat to me later. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. So thank you so much for your time and your attention and respect for all the learners who've been part of the research.